Yeah, when you're signing the documents for this lender that's going to loan you money to buy this property, you're signing a promissory note as well as a deed of trust in North Carolina. Some other states, like South Carolina, would call it a mortgage. But the promissory note is the thing that outlines the actual numbers that you're borrowing. The amount borrowing for the duration that you're borrowing it, the fact that you're promising to repay it, and your signature as a borrower. And then also that promissory note, if it's going to be negotiable, needs to say so that you have full disclosure that your lender could very well sell your note in a big package of similarly risky or low risk, probably, notes to other entities on the secondary mortgage market, because that's what they do. But if they're going to do that, they have to call it a negotiable note so that the lender can transfer that debt to a third party. And now you got to make your house payment to a different bank or entity. Notes are not recorded, but mortgages and deeds of trust are. What is in this note? Some three major provisions. Tell me one of those three, any of those three provisions, two that start with an A and one that doesn't. What sorts of provisions could be in a promissory note? Clauses. Another word would be clauses. What kind of clause? Not Santa. Timely reference. Sort of. Yeah, I guess you could say that the prepayment penalty that might be in a promissory note would basically charge you a penalty if you tried to refinance. Because don't forget, prepayment, meaning you're paying the entire loan off earlier than they thought you would. They think of it this way: they're probably not thrilled that you're doing that. They're not thrilled that you're selling that house and paying them off early, because now you're cheating them. You're not cheating them, but you're doing them out of however many years are left in the loan of interest payments. So therefore, if there is a prepayment penalty in place, that's why. It's to make up for the fact that they're not going to be getting all that interest. And it's not just selling the house that could trigger this prepayment penalty. It's also a refinance, because what is a refinance? You're going with a different bank, for instance, than the one you're with. The one you're with is going to get paid in full and not have interest coming in on your loan anymore. You're going to be refinancing with a different lender. They're going to be the one getting the long-term interest. Therefore, your current lender, who does have a prepayment penalty in place, that's going to trigger it. So a refi could trigger this thing. But don't forget, a prepayment, not a refinance, but a prepayment penalty is not allowed for an FHA loan or a VA loan or for primary residences in North Carolina under 150,000. What other provisions or clauses are in the promissory note? They have to do with when what you have to tell that lender, or what the lender can do about the timing on when you owe them the money. What if you miss a payment? What's it called when you miss a payment? Yep, your payment's either late or missed completely. And at any point when you miss a payment, that lender can initiate the acceleration clause. You need to know these things. Acceleration clause is in the promissory note, and it says that the lender now has the right to call the entire loan due immediately. They're accelerating it. Instead of giving you 30 more years as planned, or if it's been 5 years into a 30, the 20, however much is remaining, sorry, that's off the table now. You violated that by being late or by not paying. Therefore, the lender says, I want it all now. Well, you don't have it all now. That's why you got the loan. And if you can't pay it all now, that's called the first step to foreclosure. This acceleration clause is what starts the foreclosure process. They're calling the loan due because you've missed a payment or 2 or 12. Depends on how many you miss, and the lender may or may not trigger this clause. They might say they may not start foreclosure right away. They might give you a few months before they finally say, okay, enough is enough. You've been late 4 months in a row. You've been not paid for 4 months in a row. Therefore, we're going to go ahead and start foreclosure. The acceleration clause is the thing that lets them do that. It's built in. You signed it. When you signed the promissory note, you signed acknowledging that you knew there was an acceleration clause. Interesting. I'm sure people have done all manner of things to save themselves. A good question in the chat. Could you get a loan to pay the acceleration clause? Yeah. If because the lender doesn't care where the money comes from. It's just going to be from whom are you getting the loan? Yeah, you could get loans where they don't ask too many questions. I could think of one off the top of my head, a payday loan or a paycheck loan, right? You could also, when you bought it, when you bought the property, you could, if it had some equity in it, if you had gone ahead and gotten a second mortgage called a home equity line of trust, where you're basically given a debit card that takes equity out of your property every time you swipe it. If you already had that in place, you could use your home equity line of credit to make your payment to kind of hopefully get you through the tough time until you can get back on track. So yeah, you could do that. And then the other one that's in a promissory note is this thing, the alienation clause. Alienation means, oh, you're choosing to sell it, then I want my money now. I want all my money now because you're selling. I'm not going to let you not own the property and still only pay me $1,200 a month. You got to pay me the full loan balance that you owe. Another word for alienation clause that I like better, because I don't like when I'm trying to memorize a list and I have multiple same letter words in that list, is the due on sale clause, because that really explains what this thing is. It's due on the sale. The full amount due is due when you sell it. Lender calls the entire balance due. We know what negotiable is. We got into mortgage versus deed of trust. North Carolina does the deed of trust method. It's a 3-party method. It is also called a non-judicial foreclosure. If you had to foreclose, the lender can do it faster in North Carolina because the borrower signed a deed of trust in which it was told, look, you're giving me permission to take the property back because you're putting it up as collateral with this document. The deed of trust and the mortgage, both of them, depending on which state you're in, but they both accomplish the same goal. They're saying this property stands as the collateral for loaning you this money. And in the North Carolina method of the deed of trust, it's a 3-party system. There is a trustee involved. That trustee holds the deed of trust. They're the one that's an attorney probably hired by the lender. They're the one that's going to send you the letter, the foreclosure notice. You missed a payment. You missed 4 payments. For whatever reason, the lender is calling this loan due. We are going to initiate the foreclosure proceeding. Here's your notice. They do not have to do like they would in South Carolina and go to the courthouse to sue you for foreclosure. That takes longer. So as a lender, I'd rather work in North Carolina than South Carolina because I can foreclose faster. As a borrower, I'd rather be in South Carolina than North Carolina because it takes the lender longer to foreclose if I had to go through that process. So they really stacked up in 2008 era when the foreclosures happened. South Carolina, people who lived there could live longer without getting kicked out because the court system only moves at a certain pace, usually a slow pace, right? So the promissory note is a debt instrument acknowledging the amount borrowed. The mortgage or deed of trust is a security instrument identifying the property as security for what you're borrowing. Another word to know when it comes to that pledging property as security is hypothecation. You see the word hypothecation? It means putting the house up as collateral. There are some essential elements to that deed of trust. The deed of trust, by the way, is recorded. The promissory note is not, but the deed of trust is. You can look up the deed of trust of your neighbor's house if you want to. But it acknowledges that there's a debt between the borrower and the lender. The borrower signs it. So how about this? Deed versus deed of trust. Who signs the deed? Deed versus deed of trust. Who signs the deed? When it's a deed, it's different than a deed of trust, right? Two different documents. The seller is who signs the deed, but who signs the deed of trust? The buyer, because it's the buyer borrowing the money and putting the house up as collateral, right? Deed of trust is not the same document as a deed. What else is in this deed of trust? A legal description. Obviously, we're pledging something as collateral. Let's make sure it's the right something, and it needs to be in writing. That promissory note has an acceleration clause, a due on sale or alienation clause, as we just saw, and maybe a prepayment penalty, but not necessarily. What's the borrower saying with that deed of trust? I promise I'll make my payments. I promise I'll also keep the taxes and insurance paid up, because that could affect the lender. And then I promise to maintain it and get permission for major alterations. If they want to clean the windows and paint the front door, they don't need their lender's permission. But if they want to chop the roof off the house and add a story, do something significant, or take something off or sell a bit of the land, they would need permission for significant alterations, because they're messing with the collateral that is owned by someone else. You've pledged it to someone else. When it's tenants by the entirety, who's involved? Who owns it when it's a tenants by the entirety situation? Right? But who's they? That's it. Spouses, married folks. And so when somebody's married, guess what? You don't have to acknowledge it, but you might know this situation. Do you know a married couple and one of them has their financial act together and the other does not? One has great credit and the other does not. Quite common. So if one of them has lousy credit, are they going to apply for that loan with that lender? It's probably not going to help. The lender's not really going to use them because they have bad credit score. So they'll use the one with the better credit score. Who needs to sign these documents upon purchase in a married couple situation? The one who's qualified for the loan is going to sign the promissory note, because that's the thing that says you have to pay it back. But the ones who are going to live there and actually have the property and use it, remember that property is being pledged as collateral in the event the note doesn't get paid. Therefore, both of them have to sign the deed of trust. Even if only one of them is on the loan, they both have to sign the deed of trust. One of them is signing the promissory note because their credit's better, but both of them are signing the deed of trust, acknowledging that, yep, if we don't pay, we don't stay, right? That mortgage type of state like South Carolina is a two-party system called a lien theory state. Lien theory means we're going to use the word mortgage, not deed of trust. And with this, the borrower, who is called the mortgagor, so if you see mortgagor in the test question, hopefully the rest of the question will give you a hint and a reminder that that means the borrower. But if you just saw the word mortgagor, I know there was a time when I would have totally thought that that's the lender because they're making a loan. Well, that's not the way you think about it. The mortgage, what is the mortgage? It's a security instrument pledging the property as collateral. Therefore, the one pledging the property is the mortgagor, giving the property as collateral, putting it up as collateral. And so that borrower in a lien theory state gets two kinds of title, both the legal title and the equitable title, while the lender is holding the promissory note. That's different from the deed of trust method. With the deed of trust method, the borrower gets equitable title. They get to use it. They own it, right? They get to possess it and live there and make decisions and put a fence up if they want to. The trustee retains the legal title until the entire loan gets paid off, at which point they'll give it to the borrower. And then the lender, just like in the mortgage situation, holds the promissory note. So let me flip back. Here was the lien theory. The borrower is holding both legal and equitable title. Lender's holding promissory note. Title theory state, the deed of trust method, The borrower's only holding the equitable title. The trustee gets the legal title until you pay the loan off. And again, the lender holds the promissory note. What are the rights of the borrower? Well, if they do fall behind and the foreclosure process starts, there is an amount of time called the equity period of redemption that they can catch up and hopefully stop everything, save it. Let me see if I can show it to you here in your book. There it is. It's on page 368, I believe. I need brighter light. There we go. It's a little graph, a little picture there at the bottom. And see the date of default up to the date of sale. That time is the time during which the owner can maybe magically win the lottery and pay everything they owe. Don't forget, though, if it's in foreclosure, they're going to owe more than just those 4 months they're behind or however many months they've been late. They're also going to now have to pay some penalties. Some of that money is going to the trustee because that is an attorney involved in facilitating this foreclosure. Because they sent that foreclosure notice, now they have to get paid too. And so you add that to the list of what you've got to pay in order to stay. So that equity of redemption period is before the foreclosure sale. But once the sale happens and people bid on it, they bid on this foreclosed property. When someone wins that bid and is the highest bidder, it starts a 10-day upset bid period. 10-day upset bid period. Write that down. That means that they have to sit there and wait for 10 days to see if another person is going to come along with a better bid. And then if someone does, that starts another new 10-day upset bid period. Eventually, people are going to stop upsetting the bids because it's going to get to a point where they're not willing to pay more than the current bid that's on the record. So that's the duration called the statutory redemption period. That's when that upset bid period thing is happening. And the borrower could still be one of the bidders if maybe they had an uncle that gave them money or they won the lottery, but it's going to be more fees. The further into this process you go, the more fees and penalties there are, the deeper the hole is that you have to climb out of. Oh, sorry. I was showing you all that, showing it my heart out, and you weren't seeing it. Let me do this. There we go. That's what I was trying to show you from your book, page 368. This equity of redemption period from the date you defaulted to the date of the sale on the courthouse steps, so to speak, is the equity of redemption period before the sale. And then once the sale happens, the next period is called the statutory redemption period. That's the upset bid duration, when people can keep bidding on it. Which is what they're talking about here. It's going to auction at that statutory period. What are the lender's rights? Well, to take the property back. There's different kinds of foreclosure. Judicial means you're going to court to sue for foreclosure. That's the mortgage or the two-party or the lien theory method. South Carolina. Think about South Carolina. Non-judicial means we have signed off the rights as borrower in the beginning. Look, we're going to let the lender streamline this process because we signed the deed of trust. They don't have to sue us in court. We're acknowledging that they can just initiate foreclosure right off the bat. And then strict foreclosure is a little different. And there's a little more room for misbehavior with strict foreclosure. The lender could foreclose if you're late, but they might be doing it because they can see the market value of the property, and it just opens things up for that lender to do it a little more like predatorially because they know, oh, this property is worth a lot. We should foreclose on it, and we hope they're late. Oh, they are late? Okay, let's do it. It's less of a chance of the buyer making things up and catching up. When a foreclosure happens, of course, fees are starting to rack up. And the reason it's being foreclosed is that borrower wasn't able to make their payments, right? That's kind of the whole point. Well, now there's a lot of fees that have to be paid. There's probably even some liens against the property. Maybe they didn't pay the roofer, and that person filed a mechanic's lien. Maybe they didn't pay their taxes. Maybe there was a government special assessment for streetlights or road repaving that didn't get paid. Because once you don't pay one thing, you're probably not paying other things because money is a problem. So who gets paid first? In a foreclosure, when the sale happens, the foreclosure sale, the property is sold to the highest bidder and nobody upset the bid, so it got sold to that person. Well, the costs of the foreclosure sale get paid from the proceeds of the foreclosure first. Got to pay that trustee and the court for their time. Pay for the cost of sale. The next in line, as we've already learned, is the property taxes that might be a lien for and any special assessments by the government. And then after that, special liens and general liens in order of recordation, as we already learned. The lender is going to foreclose on this person. They might try to avoid foreclosure with a couple of more techniques that we're going to look at here in a minute. One of those would be a short sale. Another would be a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Regardless if it's a short sale, deed in lieu, or a foreclosure itself, any of those things might not be enough, might not result in enough money for the lender to be happy. That lender had to initiate foreclosure. They might put what's called a deficiency judgment against this borrower. That is something that's not going to be satisfied with the sale of the property. It's going to basically be a weight around the neck of that borrower forever until they pay it back, which also means it's going to show up on that borrower's credit report, make it harder for them to borrow for another house or a car or anything. It's going to show up and affect their credit score. So the lender has the right, if they're not happy and satisfied with the sale of the foreclosure, the proceeds of that sale, if that doesn't do it for them, they could say, well, that wasn't enough, borrower. We're going to put a deficiency judgment against you too, that you're going to carry around until you pay it off. So their credit could be affected, and they just carry it around. And even if they do this, a short sale is a way to avoid foreclosure. I didn't even know what a short sale was the first 12 years in the business because I didn't have to. There were agents who did these and did business called distressed properties or distressed sales, but it wasn't me. And so when 2008, 9, 10 came around, this was hard. You couldn't avoid them. They were just everywhere, very common. So all of us got real good at them. But a short sale is a way to not go through foreclosure. If you're late on a couple of payments because of maybe some sort of financial hardship, medical bills, job loss, could be all of the above. For whatever reason, you have a sad story about why you don't have money, you could contact your lender, say, look, I want to sell the property, but here's the problem. From what I've been told, it's not worth enough for me to pay you back. If I sell it, I owe you $450,000, but the most I could probably sell this for is $410,000 because that's just the market value right now because the market changes over time. Right now, by the way, in this market, values are up. We're not going to see like the number of short sales that we saw in 2008. But back then, the market prices were down. The values were down. And so lenders had a decision to make. They had to decide, do I want to foreclose on this property? Because I have the right to do that. They were late for 6 months or no payment. They haven't paid anything for 3 months or 6 months or whatever. So the lender had to choose. But do I want to foreclose? And because think about this, it's not just easy and quick. It's not a quick, easy way for that lender to get made whole again. How is that lender suffering? Well, they're not getting the money that they were told they were going to get. They're not making that monthly payment and getting interest. So now they're going to foreclose, take back this house and have to sell it in order to cash it out and get the money. And it might not be worth enough in foreclosure sale to give them everything that they are entitled to. So it might not be in the lender's best interest to foreclose on the property. They might prefer a short sale. So you better believe what the lender's thinking about is not helping the borrower, but their bottom line. They're really going to say, which way can we get more money faster? And a short sale might get them more money faster than a foreclosure. Because if they foreclose, it's going to be like probably by the time they take the house back from the borrower, that takes several months. Borrower moves out. They might just be unhappy about it and therefore trash the place. Or they might have been trashing it while they lived there. So now the lender has to pay to clean it up, empty it out. Then they have to finally put it on the market. And it's easily the case that the lender could, between the time they initiated foreclosure, told their trustee to send the note, the letter, and finally get possession to put it on the market themselves with their chosen broker, it could easily be a year before they even get to put it on the market. So it's slow money coming back to them. Now, the short sale could help them both the borrower and the lender. Could help the borrower because it keeps a foreclosure from going on their record. Because the how much it affects your credit score when you get a foreclosure is probably worse than when you have a short sale. Short sale is going to ding your credit score less than a foreclosure. And when that borrower wants to maybe try for a short sale, they're going to contact the lender and say, "Hey, send me your short sale package." The lender will mail them an envelope full of all the required documentation. It'll be a list. It'll say, "Okay, here's what we need from you. If you want us to consider a short sale, what are we asking them?" We're asking that lender, take less than I owe you. I owe you $450. I know I'm not going to be able to sell it for more than $420. Will you let me? And then, of course, I got to pay real estate commission and this and that and the other. Essentially, can I give you $400 instead of $450 or whatever the difference is? That lender's got to think about that. First of all, they're going to require that you prove to them that you need the help. You can't just do it because it's cheaper to do it than to keep paying. It can't be convenient for you. And I think we already talked about this. They're going to ask to see everything. You're going to basically be like first day in prison, stripped down. We're going to spray you down with the fire hose and sprinkle the delousing powder on you in terms of financial disclosure. We want to see all your bank accounts, including your kid's bank account. Don't try to play tricks and put $12,000 into your kid's account yesterday so that you can tell me that you don't have any money. Wrong. We'll find it, basically, is what the lender's going to do. Also, how many credit cards do you have? Oh, 3 of them? Do you have cash advances out on all 3? Well, yeah, 2, but not the third. The third, I still have the ability to take a cash advance for $5,000. Okay, do it and give it to us. We want that 5. We're not just going to let you sell the property for $420 and give us $400 when you owe us $450 without trying to recover as much and shorten that gap as much as we possibly can. That's what they're talking about. So that seller has to write a letter called a hardship letter saying, this is what's wrong. Here's why I'm asking for this foreclosure with proof. Got to show the proof. And then sit there and wait for it to creep along the lender's timeline. And it takes a while. It could be months and months before it finally gets assigned to a negotiator. And a short sale, quite frequently, you call probably once a week and say, where do we stand in the process? You, the broker, can do this with permission. Your seller would have to give their lender permission to tell you stuff and to update you. That's okay. But if that lender comes back some week when you call for an update and they say, oh, we have a response, the negotiator wants to know, will they do this or that and try to negotiate what's owed? You can't do that. As a broker, that is not in your wheelhouse. You have to let an attorney or a short sale negotiator do that. All you're doing is the sale of the property. So doing the normal things that you would do as a listing agent, but never any sort of negotiating the debt of your seller client between them and their lender. That is not allowed for you to do. The fact that your seller, and I see that we need a break here in a second. One more second, we'll finish the slide. The fact that your seller is requesting a short sale from their lender is a material fact that must be disclosed in the MLS to the whole world. So a buyer, if they want to make an offer on your listing, they need to know that this is a foreclosure sale before they make their offer, because it's only fair. It could take them a while, because when that buyer makes an offer, yes, they are offering to the seller, and the seller could say, yep, I'll take it. Great. But you've got to forward that offer up to the lender and get their approval on it too. They have to be in the decision process. Your seller signs off on it. Yes, seller says fine. But we got to wait for the lender to give their okay also. And if you just now sent off the financial package, including the hardship letter, when you got an offer in, it's going to take a while. And it's only fair for that buyer to know. This might be several weeks or months even. I even had one that we didn't get a response until a year later. The buyer had long gone, long went away, and out of the blue, the lender called me and said, or maybe that was said to my seller, look, we got an approval. Like, well, that person went away because they found a place that they could actually buy and close on a long time ago. So it takes a long time. And because it's a short sale, we use something called a short sale addendum. And the gist of that addendum is letting the buyer out at any time. They can walk away whenever they get tired of waiting, because it's only fair. That's the gist of the short sale. We'll finish that up when we come back from break. I'll see you in 10. Okay, halfway point. So short sale requires proof that you're in trouble. It takes a while. Certainly not short. It's selling it short, paying the lender short of what you owe them. Another way to avoid foreclosure is this, called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. You're basically turning the house back over to the lender. You're saying, look, can't keep paying this payment. Can I just give you the deed instead of you putting me through the foreclosure process? Now, lender may not want to. Just because you're asking them to doesn't mean they have to, right? So you're just hat in hand, so to speak, asking, what would you let me do? There are other ways to avoid foreclosure. If somebody's a couple of months behind on their payment and you find out and you're the broker, you could give them the advice to just ask the lender what their choices are, what their options are. They might let them roll the amount that is owed on the back of the loan. It's just that much more they have to pay if they're going to pay the loan off. Remember a couple of years ago, a lot of lenders allowed people to get a forbearance. Did you hear the word forbearance in the news? A loan forbearance. That just meant that people were able to not make a house payment for a while. That doesn't mean that all of those payments went away. They had to make them up. And it was like for a year for some people. They didn't have to make their payment for a whole year. But what happened after that year? The lender said, okay, now you have a couple of choices. If you were lucky, the lender would let you not pay it back immediately, just start making your payment again, and then just roll the whole year's worth of missed payments onto your loan balance. But that's not something they were required to do. More likely, the lender would say, we're not going to let you do that. We want our money sooner. Therefore, your normal payment is $1,200. You now need to make up for that forbearance period, and we want an additional $200 or $300 on top of your normal payment to work your way back to repaying this sooner than later. So hopefully you could afford $1,500 instead of $1,200. I kind of expected a wave of perhaps foreclosures or distress sales because of people trying to pay back their forbearances. I haven't really looked, but I haven't heard of anything yet of the aftermath of people who are struggling making up for the forbearance period. But that was to keep people from having to lose their properties to foreclosure because of a pandemic, right? The thing about any of these things is that the lender could put the deficiency judgment on the borrower. The short sale may not be enough. Even though you took a cash advance, even though you gave your kids college fund, the lender still might not be happy with what you're able to pay them back. And the lender says, well, here's the best we can agree to on this sale of this property, but we're going to stick a deficiency judgment against you for the rest of your life until you pay it off. It travels around with you. Same for the deed in lieu. Same for any other method. Could the foreclosure itself. So a deed in lieu of foreclosure avoids foreclosure, but could include that deficiency judgment. Okay. Obviously, when you're selling a mortgaged property, what gets the lender paid off? Well, a cash sale, but also a new loan, a refinance. Pays off the current lender, and now there's a new lender in its place. You could do something called a subject to the existing loan. So you could sell a property that has a loan on it, subject to the existing loan. The buyer makes payments on the seller's loan. The problem with this is the lender may not like it. It could be that selling something, it's something that you'll hear about when you're exploring investment property, trying to get creative with investors. An investor might say, hey, you've got a great loan, a great interest rate. You just don't tell the lender that I'm buying the property from you. I'll just start making your payment for you, and I will eventually buy the property. Problem with that is the lender, if the lender finds out somehow that it's not you that's making the payment, they could call the entire thing due. It could trigger the alienation or the due on sale clause. That foreclosure deficiency is not the buyer's responsibility. It would still rest on the owner, the seller. So they're kind of having to trust this investor buyer who they allowed to buy it subject to, and it could get messy. Another one would be a loan assumption. The buyer makes payments on the seller's loan. They assume the loan. In a loan assumption, in the 80s, you could have something called a non-qualifying loan assumption. Anybody could assume the loan, not having to qualify for it. You don't see those much anymore. There's not a lot of loans left over from the 80s. So assumptions have to be qualifying loan assumptions. If you're going to assume someone else's loan, you have to qualify for that loan. And with a loan assumption, the trick to that is if there's a deficiency, a foreclosure deficiency, the first is to the buyer. They have to make it up, but there's some secondary liability on the seller if there's not enough money recovered in a foreclosure because it was a loan assumption that got foreclosed. The buyer's going to pay as much as they can, but whatever's left over, the seller who sold to that buyer as a loan assumption has to also get into the mix and make it up to that lender. So these are rarely used, but you'll hear them referred to. Okay, as we kind of venture into some math in this chapter, some terminology, the amount you're borrowing obviously is the loan. The value, the market value is the purchase price of the property. So a term that you'll see that you've already seen if you read ahead, hopefully, is LTV, loan to value ratio. What's the loan to value ratio on that loan that you're getting? It means how much of the purchase price or the market value are you going to borrow? What percentage? Oh, I'm going to get an 80% loan to value ratio. That means I'm going to borrow 80% of the value of the property. If I'm going to borrow 80% of the value of the property, then what percent do I have to make as a down payment? If I'm borrowing 80, what's left? Sorry, I have to wake you up halfway through. Hang in there. There are two chunks of money that make up the full sales price: the amount you're borrowing and the amount you're putting down. So if you're borrowing 80%, then that's going to require that you put 20% as a down payment. What does that mean? The buyer has to put their own money into it. The lender's not going to loan them 80% of the value unless the borrower has 20% of their own money in the transaction. Why? Because the lender wants to feel like the borrower is more likely to repay the loan. And for whatever reason, this is a real world figure. The lender's stats, I guess history and statistics have proven that with 20% or more equity in the property, borrowers are much less likely to allow it to go into foreclosure. Don't forget that lender doesn't want foreclosure. They don't want to take the property back. They're not in the real estate business. They're in the interest business. They want to make interest on money they're loaning out. It costs them time and money to foreclose on property. So they want to minimize the chances of that foreclosure happening as much as they can. Therefore, they want to make loans to people in situations where foreclosure is very low chance, low likelihood. And statistically, historically, people with at least 20% of their own skin in the game, their own money as a down payment, are less likely to allow it to go into foreclosure. Life gets hard. They have medical bills. They lose their job. The logic here is they're going to keep making their house payment. They're going to let the car be repossessed. They're going to maybe let the lights go out. Maybe they'll eat differently and won't go out to eat, and they might buy canned stuff and ramen instead of steak, but they'll keep making their mortgage payment because if it forecloses, they could possibly lose that equity they have in the property. What's equity? Well, on day one, when you first close on the property that you're borrowing money to buy, Your equity is whatever your down payment is. I think we talked about that before. So those are some common terms that you'll see thrown around here in a minute. The amount borrowed versus the amount you're putting down versus the price itself. So if it's an 80% loan to value ratio, that means the borrower's equity is 20%, or the borrower's down payment was 20%. Well, once that borrower buys the property, they have 20% down payment in it. So it was required maybe. That lender could say, look, I will loan you money to buy this house, but you have to put 20% down payment. I will only loan you an 80% loan to value, and it's only because you have good credit that I'm willing to do this. Or maybe because you have lower credit, you've got to put more of your money in it, more of a higher down payment. The worse credit, the more down payment maybe would be what that lender requires to be willing to loan you the money. So that LTV is going to come up time and time again. Anytime we're calculating lender-related fees, loan fees are all about the loan amount. You're not going to base a lender's fees on the purchase price. You're going to always base the lender's fees they charge on what you're borrowing from them, the loan itself, right? So let's take a look at some things here. If we have a $250,000 purchase price and a loan to value ratio of 80%, meaning you're borrowing 80% of $250,000, that means your loan, what is 80% of 250? If we plug it in the calculator, 250 times 80% is $200,000. You're borrowing $200,000 in order to buy this house. If you're borrowing $200,000 and the value of it or the price of it is $250,000, how much is your down payment? Easy math, $50,000, right? So the math to figure out loan amount based on LTV is right there. The main T formula is purchase price times loan to value ratio equals the amount being borrowed, or the loan amount. So on the right, 250,000 times 80% is the loan amount of 200,000. What if there was a way that you could very quickly and easily determine how much someone's principal and interest payment is going to be based on whatever they're borrowing and whatever their interest rate is? Well, anybody who has ever used a financial calculator or a mortgage calculator on the internet has done this, except you didn't know you were doing it. All you did was plug numbers into that calculator, right? You plugged in the price and the down payment and the interest rate, and it popped out how much your monthly payment is going to be. But what did we say about monthly payment? What's included in the monthly payment? You tell me in the chat. What types of figures are included in a monthly payment to a lender? Out of that payment, what's it called? What's the money going to the lender versus the money that's coming off of what you owe? Yeah, interest is going to the lender. Good job. That's why they're in the business. That's why they're doing it. But not all of your payment is going to go to the lender. Most of it in the early years, but a portion of your payment is also going to be reduced from your loan balance. What was that P word? There it is. There it is. Yeah, principal and interest. And then also, Carrie points out, probably taxes and insurance, because quite often that lender would prefer that you also every month pay a little bit toward your tax bill and a little bit toward the insurance policy. And that lender, out of the goodness of their heart, is going to, and for your own convenience, is going to pay those amounts and keep that money on reserve, the taxes and insurance, and pay them when they come due. Just kidding. They're not doing it for you. They're doing it for themselves to make sure those things get paid, because it could harm them if the taxes and insurance doesn't get paid. But yeah, PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Well, let's set the taxes and insurance aside for a minute. let's just think about the actual principal and interest. How much interest to the lender plus how much coming off of your loan balance. There is a way to figure that, to calculate that, and it's called the loan factor chart. And it's in chapter 15 for some reason. We're in 14, kind of. We're bridging the gap. Both of these chapters really could be one big chapter. But you won't find that loan factor chart until you get to chapter 15. Here's what it looks like. Looks like this. Here we go. I'll show you a better version. That's the live version, page 412 and 413. In that loan factor chart, it looks like this more specifically. Here we go. This is on the iPad. I just took a picture of it. Couple things. First of all, this chart is written, it's boiled down and reduced to tell you how much your principal and interest payment would be if you only borrowed $1,000. This whole chart is based on $1,000 of a loan amount of $1,000. So let's just say the rate is 4%. You can see there's rates all down the left side, but let's just say it's 4 because it's easy to follow. If your loan term is only 10 years, at a 4% rate for 10 years, your loan factor number is 10.13. What does that mean? Well, don't forget, we just said that this chart is all about payments to amortize a loan of $1,000. So if you're borrowing $1,000 at a 4% rate for 10 years' time, then your monthly payment in principal and interest combined is going to be $10.13. Right? That's all this is saying. This chart is per $1,000, but nobody's borrowing only $1,000. What if you're borrowing $100,000? Not just 1,000, but 100 of them. 100,000s. Well, then take the amount of payment for principal and interest that you'd have to pay to borrow 1,000 and multiply it by how many thousands are in 100,000. You tell me, quick math, how many thousands are in $100,000? Look at you geniuses. You haven't even answered yet, and I know you know it. 100,000 divided by 1,000. There's 100 1,000s in $100,000, right? There's $100,000 bills in the cash figure of 100,000. Therefore, multiply the factor they give you, the 10.13, by that 100, and it tells you your monthly payment for principal and interest combined is $1,013 if you borrow $100,000. So let's look at it this way. Probably you're going to have a longer term, not just 10-year loan term. Let's say that it's even, let's get current. Let's say it's a 6.5% interest rate. There is our 6.5 rate. We're going to follow it along, keep on going over, blah, 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 all the way to the end, because this, as you'll see, gotta charge that battery, is the column for 30 years. Hang on one second. Don't trust iPads. Okay, we're charging. So the loan factor for borrowing at 6.5% interest rate for a 30-year term is wherever it falls on the chart. And in this case, the loan factor is 6.32 or $6.32. Because again, this chart is per $1,000. Per $1,000. So if you borrow $1,000 at 6.5% interest rate for 30 years, your monthly payment for principal and interest is going to be $6.32. Right? That makes sense? This chart makes sense? So what do you do with this chart? If it talks about a loan factor, your first step is to figure out the loan amount. So let's go back to our slides. Here they are. Our loan amount was $200,000 we got, right? Price was $250,000. We're borrowing $80,000, so our loan amount was $200,000. Well, first step, look on the right, divide that $200,000 by 1,000. So you can see how many $1,000 bills are in $200,000 being borrowed. 200 of them, right? 200 of them. And because of the rate given and the duration of the loan factor on the chart is 4.78. In the test question, they'll probably just give you that factor. They could possibly give you the chart and make you look it up on the chart, but I doubt it. They're probably just going to say, at a loan factor of 4.78, what would be the monthly principal and interest with a loan amount of $200,000? That's probably what you're going to see it asked, the way you will see it asked. Doesn't matter how they ask it. You're going to need to know the loan factor and the loan amount. So our loan amount's $200,000. Divide it by 1,000 to get 200. Multiply that 200 by the 4.78. Where did 4.78 come from? The chart. Because at 4.78, let's look at the chart and see what that means for an interest rate. Where did I go? Oh, there it is. On the chart, where's 4.78? Oh, there's one. There's probably several of them. But 4.78 shows up under the 30-year column at a 4% rate. So if you borrow money at 4% interest rate for 30 years, your loan factor is $4.78 per $1,000 being borrowed. On this particular chart, that's the only place 4.78 shows up. But there are some places where numbers show up more than once. Like here's a 6.49 and, well, it's somewhere in between there. Doesn't matter. Point is, that's what the chart is doing. And anytime you use an online mortgage calculator, it's got an algorithm built into it that has basically these numbers on this chart that it's using to do the math. That's all it is this chart behind the scenes doing that math. So, doing this math of 200,000 divided by 1,000 times 4.78 gives us a monthly principal and interest combined of $956. What we don't know is how much of that $956 is going toward principal versus interest. We don't know the proportion. We just know that the total of principal and interest both is $956. You with me? Okay. That's leading up to another type of question that you might see. But first, let's look at this next bit. You will calculate your interest payments. You can calculate how much you owe your lender in interest. And it's done not with compound interest, but with simple. Anybody ever heard the term compound interest? Don't worry about it. We're doing simple interest. All we're going to do is multiply the amount borrowed or the balance of your loan times the interest rate that you have your loan at. Right now, rates are somewhere in the 6.5 to 7 range. So whatever your interest rate is that you're locked in for, times the amount that you owe. If you multiply those two together on the bottom, as we see here, what that results in is your annual interest, because that interest rate, when people are quoting interest rates, they are quoting, for instance, annually. It says, here's the rate per year. It's this amount of interest per year, annual interest. So when you take that balance, that loan balance, multiply it by the 4.5% interest rate, and let's just say the amount that we have on our loan currently is $100,000. If we multiply those two things together, that gives us an annual amount of interest. We're paying $4,500 in interest alone in 1 year to the lender when we're borrowing $100,000 at 4.5% interest rate. That's what that means. And here's the T formula for it. That comes in handy because what you could see on the test is this question. They can ask you, and they probably will, what would be your loan balance after the first month's payment is made? You're going to have to calculate the monthly principal and interest. Then you're going to have to do this part and figure out how much is the daily interest. And then you're going to have to subtract and figure it out. And so I'll show you that here in just a second. But first of all, if $4,500 is the annual interest, how much is the daily interest? If it's $45 per year, what do we do to figure out the daily interest? You got it. 4,500 by, in our case, we're doing 360 to make the math easy. So 4,500 a year means $12.50 per day. And by the way, if it's $4,500 per year, how much would it be per month? 12 months in a year. It'd be $375 per month. Right? So just know that when you get the per year, you can easily get the per day or the per month. So if our loan balance is $200,000 and the interest rate is 4% over a 30-year loan term, the annual interest that we're paying based on borrowing $200,000 at 4% for 30 years is $8,000. Plugging in the $200 loan balance times the interest rate gives us $8,000. That's how much of interest to the lender we paid in that year based on borrowing $200. Now, that annual interest of $8,000, how much is it per month? It's $8,000 divided by 12. So monthly interest, if it's annual interest of $8,000, the monthly is going to be $667 because $8,000 divided by 12 months is $667 per month. For that first month, because we borrowed $200,000, that's how much our loan balance is in the first month. Our loan balance is not the same every month, is it? It goes down for every month, right? But on month one, congratulations, welcome to the bank. You just closed on your house. Now you get to pay us for 30 years. Month one, your loan balance is $200,000. That's why we're using it in this first step. $200,000 is our first loan balance, 4% interest rate, $8,000 per year. What does that mean per month? $667. Now what do we do? What are we trying to do anyway? We're trying to figure out how much we're going to owe the lender after our first month's payment. How much do we owe the lender after making our first payment? That's what we're looking for right now. So we know that our monthly principal and interest is $956, third line from the bottom. We know that because of the loan factor chart. That's why we know this, because it's in the loan factor chart. We plugged in the loan balance or the loan amount times the loan factor and got 956. But the problem with 956 is we don't know which portion is interest versus principal. It's just all added in together as a total. But now we do know what the interest is on month one. We just did that back here. The interest portion in the first month of 956, the part of that is going toward interest is $667. So let's subtract that. And that's going to leave us how much we're paying our loan down. How much are we going to pay toward our principal if our interest is $667 and the total payment is $956? When you subtract, it shows our loan balance is going to reduce after month one's payment by almost $300 or $289. Don't worry, this will be better and make more sense with repetition. So hang in there. It's scary the first time through. It's okay. Okay. We've got our original loan balance. Look in the right side here. $200,000 was our original loan balance. Well, after month one's payment, that $200,000 gets decreased by $289. We just determined that. We just figured it out. So what's $200,000 minus $289? After the first month's payment, you now owe, instead of $200, you owe $199,711. That is your new loan balance after making your first payment. How many payments are in 30 years? 360, right? 360. 30 years of payments, 12 payments a year. 360 payments. You've got 359 more payments to go. You've paid one. Now, you've figured out that what is your loan balance after your first payment, your first month's payment? Your loan balance is now $199,711. On the test, they might ask you, what's your loan balance after 2 months, not just one. I doubt they're going to ask you more than that. They won't do 3 or 4 or 12 or anything crazy. But you might have to do all of what we just did over again one more time. And you'll do the exact same steps we just did, except now you're going to use $199,711 instead of the $200, because now your loan balance that's remaining is $199,711. Does that make sense? So take that $199,711, multiply it by the 4%, just like you did before with $200,000. That gives you your annual interest of $7,988, because it's a different loan balance, same interest rate. $7,988, what is that per month? Divide it by 12. Now, instead of $667 per month, it's $665 per month. Oh, wow. You paid the lender $2 less this month than you did the first month. Now we've got that $665 in interest for month 2. It's going to be the same monthly payment, by the way. You don't have to do that over again because it's still $956 per month. And you take that $956, subtract the interest going to the lender of $665, your principal amount of reduction, the second month's payment, $291. Subtract that from that $199,711, and that gives you your loan balance after 2 payments. After your first 2 payments, you now only owe the lender $199,429. So you've paid them down almost $600 in 2 months. That's a potential problem on the test, quite likely, in fact. Maybe only after the first month's payment, but possibly after the second month's payment. Need to know how to do that. Okay, another lender fee calculation that you might need to do that's pretty easy. This one is not all drawn out and long like that last one. This was basically an administration fee, just sort of a, you want a loan from us, then we're going to charge you an origination fee. To originate a loan means we are going to make the loan for you and we're going to charge you a fee for that. So the easy part about a loan origination is it's just going to be a percentage of what? Anytime we're talking about lender fees, we're talking about loan amount. We're going to base everything off loan amount, not purchase price. So therefore, a 1% origination fee means 1% of the loan amount is what they're charging you, the borrower, to make that loan. What's the origination fee? 1%. 1% of what? Whatever you're borrowing. If you're borrowing $200,000, 1% of $200,000 is $2,000. What if your neighbor is going to buy the exact same house, your potential new neighbor eventually, they're going to buy the house next door, but they're going to borrow $100,000, not $200,000. Well, then their loan origination fee is only going to be $1,000 because 100,000 times 1% is 1,000. That loan origination fee could be anything. It could be 0.5%, or 2%, or 1.5%, or 1%. So they're going to tell you in the test question, what is the loan origination fee? And they'll say, how much do you have to pay for loan origination? You're going to need to know some information. You're going to need to know the loan amount and how much they're charging for the origination. Multiply them together. Now, they might get a little sneaky, a little tricky, not too bad, but they'll say the purchase price. Let me do it this way. I don't want to overwhelm you with spoken word. They might say this. Sales price is $300,000. Loan to value ratio is 90%. Origination fee is 1.5%. How much is the buyer paying for origination fee? I'll pause and let you work that out. What would be our first step? You got it. 90% times 300, $270,000 is our loan amount. We need to know what 1.5% of 200,000 is. There's that 40, 50. That's how much you're paying for loan origination at 1.5% when you're buying for 300,000 at a 90% LTV. Good job. Okay. Another lender related fee that you'll run into is this one, discount points. You won't pay discount points on every transaction. You won't see them as a broker on every transaction because they are serving a very specific purpose. While the origination fee is basically probably going to show up on every transaction as an administration, you're getting a loan from us, here's our fee, one of many. The discount points serve a very special purpose. What they are doing is allowing the borrower to pay less interest over the life of the loan. You're doing something called buying down your interest rate. What if a borrower was going to buy, let's say January of last year, and they saved up their money and they got all excited and they thought, I can afford the house. I did the math. I plugged it into a mortgage calculator, and at 3.25% interest rate, January of last year, times this amount of loan amount, my payment's going to be such and such. Well, maybe life happened. They didn't get a chance to buy in January of last year. Now they're going to be buying in January of this next year, meaning next month. Guess what's different? The interest rate. They are not getting a 3.5% rate anymore. They're probably going to pay almost double that. Well, what if they can't afford to pay? They want the same house, of course. They're not going to want to downsize the house. They just have to have that same house. But now their payment is a lot more because it's going to be 6.5% instead of 3.5% interest rate. If only there was a way they could lower their interest rate. There is. By paying the lender dollars up front. Prepaid interest. When you see the word discount points, another term should come into your mind called prepaid interest, because that's what it is. Discount points are allowing that borrower to make their payment on the lower interest rate, whatever they're buying it down to, because what they're doing is giving the lender all of that interest they would have made at closing instead of making them wait and getting it per payment. So if they want to buy the rate down by, let's make it a little more realistic. They cannot afford a payment based on a 6.5% rate, but they can afford a payment based on a 6% rate. So not 6.5, but 6 even, they're okay with. They could fit that into the budget. They need to buy the rate down by 0.5%. So, a couple things about discount points. Number one, how much will it cost to buy the rate down by that 0.5%? And also, how much will it cost to do so? How much will it cost? How much will the discount points cost? And how much does it buy the rate down? So let's look at this example, and then we'll come back to mine. First of all, discount points, couple things. It's called prepaid interest. Another thing that it's called is, write this one down, lender yield. Y-I-E-L-D, yield, lender yield, because that lender's getting it. If your yield is what you're making. So the lender's yielding cash up front because they're going to let the borrower have a lower interest rate over time. Well, they're not going to do that for free. They're going to do that at a price, the price of discount points. Wow, I don't know how that happened. That was crazy. I wish I could figure that out. Huh. That was as much a surprise to you as me. Lender yield is the same as discount points. I'm writing this in the chat. You'll see in a minute. Is the same as prepaid interest right there in the chat. Those mean the same thing. On the test question, if they refer to any of these things, they mean the other. It all boils down to discount points. Discount points. The ability to get a lower interest rate by paying the lender cash at closing. Who pays discount points? Whoever you can get to do it. You could as the borrower. You could as the broker, by the way. You could pay discount points for your client. You could rebate your client part of your commission, which could be used toward discount points. Your buyer's mom and dad could pay discount points. The builder, the new construction builder, might have to offer incentives like paying buyer discount points because it's a competitive market. That's something that happens in a market that's really not where we're at right now, but eventually it'll be that kind of market again. A seller could pay discount points. If maybe a seller's having a hard time selling their house, they might want to promote that in the advertising and say, hey, seller will pay up to 3 discount points with approved or with acceptable offer, something like that. Anybody can pay them. So it'll probably tell you who's paying them in the test question, but more specifically what they're worried about on this test question is the number. They're going to say, how much will it cost to buy 1 discount point? Let's do that. What you need to know, the cost of a discount point is this, for your purposes. 1 discount point costs 1% of the loan amount. That is a given. That is a standard that you will deal with in this course. How much does a discount point cost? Depends on the loan amount. What if the loan amount is $200,000? What's 1% of $200,000? 1 discount point on a loan amount of $200,000 costs $2,000. But what if it's 2 discount points that borrower needs? One discount point doesn't get their rate down enough to make it affordable. They need two of them. Well, that's going to be $4,000. You could do it this way. You could also plug it in the calculator. 200,000 times 2%, $4,000. All of that's pretty easy. But what if it says you need 2.5 discount points? Can't do that one quite so easy, maybe. 200,000 times 2.5%. 2.5 discount points going to cost $5,000. You with me? How much does a discount point cost? 1% of the loan amount. But here's where it can get confusing. One discount point costs 1% of the loan amount. But what if the interest rate that you cannot afford is 6.5%, and the interest rate you can afford is 6%? That 1% discount point, that's not 1% off of this number. It doesn't mean that now your interest rate's going to be 5.5%. No, that's not how that works. 1% of the loan amount means how much it costs to get the point. But what does it do to your rate? One discount point lowers the rate by 1/8 of this kind of rate. So 1/8 of a percent. One entire discount point only drops your rate by 1/8 of a percent. So how many decimals is 1/8? Well, that's not as hard as it looks. 1 divided by 8. 1 divided by 8. 0.125 is the decimal version of an eighth. So one discount point lowers the rate by 0.125. So if the rate you cannot afford is 6.5 and the rate you can afford is 6.0, what's the difference? 0.5%, 0.5%. And so then how many 0.125s is in 0.5? Okay, still not bad. 0.5 divided by 0.125 is 4 discount points. You're going to have to buy 4 discount points to now have an interest rate for 30 years at 6% instead of 6.5. It's going to cost you 4 discount points to enjoy a 6% rate instead of the 6.5 that the lender's charging everybody else. Well, how much do those 4 discount points cost if it's a $200,000 loan? 4% of that. For the low price of $8,000 at closing, you can make your rest of your 30 years worth of monthly payments based on 6% instead of 6.5%. You with me? Might take a time or two. Let's try it. Yeah, go ahead. No, you would have to do it again, or maybe hopefully you could refinance at a lower rate. But you better believe discount points are all the rage right now, because a lot of people had a big difference if they were thinking about buying and they didn't over the course of 3, 6, 9, 12 months these last year. Now they're having to think, because nobody ever really wants to compromise on the house. They're like, no, how could I buy the smaller house? I got to buy the same house. So this conversation's coming up more and more. In fact, I've got one now. It's going to be new construction. They're building. They'll be done in about 9 months. And so they haven't locked in a rate yet, but they're like, well, we've got this money coming from here and that money coming from here, and the builder's going to give us $30,000 toward closing costs. We're going to use 12 of that toward the actual closing cost, and the rest of the remaining 19,000, we'll just buy the rate down, however much that will buy it down. So people are using discount points a lot right now. And it just happens sometimes, it doesn't happen all the time. How about this scenario? The rate in the market is 7%, but you can only afford 6.75%. And let's say the sale price, no, I won't do that to you. We'll say the loan amount, we'll save ourselves a step, is $700,000. Oh boy. $700,000 loan amount, and you can't afford 7% interest rate, but you can afford 6.75%. How much will it cost for you to buy enough discount points to get from 7% down to 6.75%? Oh boy. Well, what's the difference? The difference between 7 and 6.75, or 6.75, is 0.25. And so what we need to know is, what is it per 1/8? 1/8 is 0.125. So 0.25 divided by 0.125 is 2, right? That's 2 discount points. And so we know how many discount points we need. Now we can calculate how much they are going to cost. 2% of $700,000. $14,000. If you can come up with $14,000 at closing, your payment can be based for the life of your loan on 6.75 instead of 7%. See how that works in real life? Now, for your purposes, 1 discount point buys the rate down by 1/8. But just between you and me, in real world right now, 1% of 1 discount point actually lowers the rate by like a quarter, 1/4, which is like twice better. But you're going to need to know the 1/8 number for your purpose in this test. We okay? I'm just saying the 1/8 is what they're teaching you in the book. So right. 1/8. Yep. For this class, it's 1/8. In real life, I'm not sure. Or whatever the lender's willing to do. How much the lender's willing to give you a point and reduce the rate because of. But you don't need to worry about that in real life. Just know that 1 point buys the rate down by 1/8 in order to pass the PSI exam. Yeah, right. You got it. So in real life, actually, the lender would be somebody that's going to be dealing with these types of questions. You might ask the question, but you don't need to understand it. You just say, hey, lender, my client needs to buy some discount points because they can't afford the 7% rate. Just curious, how much does 1 point lower the rate by? And right now, if you ask any given lender that on Facebook or out there in the real world, they'd probably say 1/4. But again, for your purposes in this class, we're working with 1/8. That's how you're going to need to calculate it. Let's do one more to lock it in, hopefully. This time, we've got a 5.25 rate. We need to get down to 4.75 of a rate, interest rate. And the loan amount is $360,000. How much will it cost in discount points to get that rate from 5.25 down to 4.75? Ooh, I'm past a break. I owe you a break. I'll go ahead and combine the two. You be working on this, and then when you're done, I'll allow like an extra couple minutes, but you can be working on this during the break, and I'll see you in 12 minutes. we need to do on this problem? We need to get from 5 1/4 down to 4 3/4 of a percent interest. So, step 1, figure out the difference. There we go. That's what I was trying to do. 5 1/4 minus 4 3/4 minus 4 blah 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 0.5. Just do it that way. 0.5. So how do we find out how many 1/8 are in 1/2? The 0.5 divided by the decimal version of 1/8, which means 4. It's going to cost us 4 discount points to buy that rate down. How much will those 4 discount points cost, given the loan amount of $360,000? A lot. If you just won the lottery on a scratch off and you've got an extra $14,400, you could enjoy a lower interest rate, a 4.75 instead of 5.25, if you got the 14.4 to give the lender up front as lender yield, also known as prepaid interest, also known as discount points. Right? Some other words you could see in the test question, ways that could be referred is they could say the investor wants to yield the 5.25, but the lender is willing to give a lower rate to this point, to give a rate of 4.75. Think of it this way. The investor is the one whose money is being borrowed. The lender is the one who is facilitating the transaction. It's not necessarily the case that it's the lender's money that they're loaning. They've got investors, backers that provide this money. It could be banks, savings and loans. It could be insurance companies. All of these are places that invest money in the mortgage market. So if the investor insists on getting 5.25, but the lender is willing to lower the rate to 4.75, that's how they could set up a question like this. You're going to need to recognize, oh, wait, the investor wants this. That means the higher rate that we're buying down from is the 5.25. The lender is willing, or the buyer needs the rate to be lower. That's the one we need to get down to. Therefore, that's the subtraction we need to do. So they'll talk about the higher rate. They'll use the word like investor, maybe. Or the lower rate is the borrower needs it, or the lender is willing to loan on that with enough discount points. How many discount points are needed, or how much will they cost, or both, right? So just be looking out for those words. That's what that type of setup, that problem could be set up that way. Okay, back to our slides. Now that you know how it works, here's our loan amount times the number of points, 4 discount points, or is 4% of the loan amount. That means $8,000 is how much 4 points will cost. But you are now old pros at that. Here's what the 1/8 looks like. Don't worry about fractions. If fractions freak you out, just convert them to the decimal. What's 1/8 in the form of a decimal? 0.125. If you don't remember that, just divide 1 divided by 8, and it'll remind you. What was that decimal for 1/8 again? Oh, 1/8. 1 divided by 8, 0.125. So how many 0.125s are in whatever the difference is between the two rates that you need to buy down? Your payment is quite likely going to include taxes and insurance. We know how to get the principal and interest, But what about the taxes and insurance? So on the test question, they could give you the loan factor and the loan amount, and you're going to use those to get the PI, principal and interest. But then they could say taxes per year. Have we done some math before that calculated taxes per year? Yeah, some of the first math we did. They might give you one of those problems and say tax value is 250, tax rate is 13 mils. How much is going to be the monthly tax responsibility? Uh-oh. Okay, slow down, Neil. Don't give us all of that at once. Hang on a second. As I forget what I just said. Let's say it was 250. Assessed value. Remember good old assessed value? Tax rate 13 mils. Can we somehow calculate the annual taxes with this information? Remember, if it's mils, we divide by 1,000. To put that in the right decimal format, multiply that by that tax value or assessed value. Our annual taxes are $3,250. What about monthly taxes? If annual is $3,250, monthly is $270.83. And so if we have already calculated our monthly principal and interest, to be, I think I remember, was it like 956 was on that first problem we ever did. And then the taxes, how much are they going to be on the monthly? Another 270 and some cents. And then what you might also be told in the question is the insurance policy, the 1-year insurance premium is $837. So if insurance for 1 year cost $837, let me make myself some room here. $837 for the whole year. That's how they'll word it, by the way. They'll say the first year or the 1 year premium, insurance premium, is this amount of money. So $837 per year means what per month? Insurance, $837 per year. Divide that by 12. It's another $69.75 for taxes. I'm sorry, for insurance. Can't read that too well, but let's take the $69.75 plus, I believe it was $270.84 plus the $956. Your PITI, total principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, is $1,296.59. That's how that figure comes together. That's how they do it. We know how to determine annual taxes, therefore we can determine monthly taxes. The insurance will be just given to you. How much is 1 year insurance premium? They'll tell you. Now you can turn that into a monthly. The lender, when you borrow money, they say the same thing. What's the taxes on this property? Okay, then your monthly payment needs to include $270 going toward your taxes. And then also, what's the insurance policy? Part of the closing procedure we'll learn probably tomorrow is to connect your insurance agent with the closing attorney. Get the binder. As the broker, you'll get the insurance binder, which basically says what the policy is going to be all about and how much it will cost, sent over to the closing attorney so they can factor in that math and figure out where that they need to send off that first year's premium. When you have a closing, the entire first year of insurance is going to be paid up front. That'll just be done so that you don't have to worry about it. And then after that, it's going to be handled this way. Part of your payment every month will include money going toward insurance. What if the taxes change? Did we learn that the taxes could change from 1 year to the next? Sure they could, because the rate could change from 1 year to the next. What if that happens? Well, the lender wants you to pay them $270 toward taxes with every payment, but now the taxes are going to be $296 per month. What's going to happen? Well, part of the process of setting up the closing and setting up the new loan is the lender tells the settlement attorney, look, I want you to collect some extra money from the borrower, from the buyer, in order to set up the escrow account so that the insurance money and the tax money is plenty there. There's plenty there to be used to pay those bills when they come due. Guess what? That lender doesn't trust you. They want to make sure that there's enough money as a cushion to pay these bills when they come due. So in order to give you the loan, they're going to require that you, the borrower, escrow or set aside money in their possession. They're holding your money in a trust account, in an escrow account. Does that sound familiar? But this time they're holding that money in order to pay the tax bill and the insurance bill when they come due. So your monthly payment includes principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. That lender's not sending that little $270 for taxes this month straight into the government. Because you remember what happens there. The government doesn't want your tax money yet. When do they want to start collecting your money or taking your payments for your taxes, for your property taxes? What's the first possible date you could pay your property tax bill? What date was that? In September. That you can possibly, yeah, there it is. September 1st. You can't pay your taxes before September 1st. That's when they start accepting payment. Therefore, your lenders wants to stick the money somewhere in the meantime. Same for the insurance. You don't pay the insurance every month. It gets billed probably quarterly or maybe yearly. So they need to park it somewhere. And so you're making your PITI payment. The lender is, that's why it's called an escrow payment on this slide. The taxes and insurance are going into escrow. And in order to close on the house, the lender has the closing attorney set aside a certain number of months of taxes and insurance. How many months? It depends on what the lender wants. They'll tell the attorney how many months they want them to collect at closing. They might say, look, attorney, this is the lender speaking, and we want you to collect 3 months of taxes to set up the escrow for this borrower. Well, if the taxes are going to be $270 per month and they want to collect 3 months worth, $270 times 3 months is how much it's going to take to set up the taxes in the escrow account. What is that? Like $740, I think, something like that. 600 plus another 140. And then for insurance, if it's like $70 a month, well, they'll say, and we want to collect 5 months for insurance. It just depends on the time of year and what that particular lender wants to collect. They will give those as instructions to the lender, to the attorney, as to what they want them to collect. So the attorney will then tell you, the broker, and the borrower, look, and the lender, they'll say escrow, or say we're going to collect 3 months for taxes and 5 months for insurance. And it'll show up on the closing disclosure that outlines every single dollar being paid as a credit or a debit on the closing documentation. That's kind of how that works out. Okay, so we need to back up a minute. Go back to the point where the lender is thinking about giving you the loan. They're not sure yet. They want to know some stuff. You want to borrow enough money to buy this particular house, but can you afford it? The lender needs to determine, based on your financial records, how much money you make per month gross income, and versus how much money you spend per month on recurring debt. That is used to figure out, can you afford this house? What is the likelihood that you will get foreclosed on and won't be able to make the payment? The lender on different loan types requires different amounts. So in a lower risk loan, like a conventional mortgage, by the way, as opposed to a government related one like an FHA or VA. Conventional is a private type of financed mortgage, and they're best for anybody who can afford them. They're best if you have better credit and you have a decent amount of down payment. But if you don't have decent credit or as good enough credit or enough for down payment to get a conventional loan, then go seek out those other solutions, FHA or VA or something else. But you should always try conventional first because they charge you the lesser amount. They won't charge you as much interest. The fees are lower. You're paying for the privilege of a more difficult loan to make. And FHA and VA loans are a little more risky. Therefore, you pay extra in fees, finance charges, and whatnot. So, if you're trying to get a conventional loan, the numbers to qualify, qualifying ratios are 28% and 36%. What does that mean? It means that just the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, the PITI, cannot be more than 28% of what you make gross monthly income. So, if your gross monthly income is $1,000 a month, what's 28% of $1,000? $280. The most you could afford to pay for principal and interest, taxes, and insurance is $280. How likely is that? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what the ratios mean. The lender doesn't want to loan you more than 28% of your monthly gross income. They don't want you to be paying more than 28%. This is a better way to say it. The lender doesn't want you to be paying more than 28% of your gross monthly income toward PITI. Because if you do, their logic is you're more likely to not be able to afford it over time and more likely that you'll end up in foreclosure. Well, that's not like 100% realistic. Nobody only has PI and TI on their bills, right? You have more bills than principal and interest, taxes, and insurance. What other bills do you have or do people have? Tell me in the chat. What other things do you spend money on regularly per month besides the house? Yep, utilities, car, that's a big one. Yeah, what other monthly recurring bills might you have? Yeah, credit cards, another big one. Loans, student loans. Oh boy, here we go. Medical bills, sometimes like a payment, like a medical monthly recurring. Anything recurring every month is rolled in on top of the PITI, and all of that combined cannot exceed 36% of your gross income. So it's a front end ratio and a back end ratio the lender looks at. For a conventional loan, and for our purposes in this class and for the test, a conventional qualifying ratio is 28-36. 28%, no more than 28% of your monthly income going toward your house payment, PITI, and no more than 36% of your monthly income going toward the house payment plus the car, plus the HOA, homeowner association, plus the credit cards, plus the whatever. That's how they qualify you. That's the first appointment with the lender. They're going to ask these questions of your borrower or buyer. They're going to say, what do you make in a month? What's your gross income? And what are your recurring bills? And what's the price range and the available down payment of the house you want to buy? Because we'll use that to figure out the PITI. Oh, and where is it? Because we need to calculate the taxes and know what the tax rate is. Is it in Charlotte or is it in Cary or Raleigh or Concord? All of those have different tax rates. And so according to our best estimate, your monthly payment's going to be $1,200. So if your monthly payment is $1,200, what's the most you need to, what amount do you need to make gross income? Let's look at it this way. Your payment, your PITI on this house that you want is $1,200. So that PITI front end ratio needs to be 28% or less. So this $1,200 needs to be 28% or less of your monthly gross income. Then how do we do that backwards math? Your monthly, let's just call it gross income, call it G for gross income. Oops, sorry. Oops. My arm hit it. Your gross monthly income, this GI, times 28% needs to equal $1,200. Well, if we see it and get it written out this way, we can turn this into a T formula. All we do is take the two things that are multiplied and throw the other thing on top. That means we can take 1,200, divide it by 28%, and that tells us that your gross monthly income needs to be at least $4,286 in order to qualify to buy this house, so that your payment is $1,200 for PITI. You're making $4,286 per month gross? That's what the lender's going to ask. But then the lender wants to know more than that. That's not enough. The lender says, well, you're probably going to have more than a house payment. Let me make a couple notes here so I don't forget our numbers. $4,286. You also have some recurring debt. You chose to buy that nice new car last month that cost $700 a month. You got some loans. It's another $200 a month. And you have some credit cards that are $500 a month. So on top of this $1,200, the total of everything combined plus 7 is $2,600 a month. That is the back end ratio. Your payment, your PITI for the house, plus all of these other choices you made. Why am I saying it that way? Because sometimes you got to talk to your buyer and say, do you really need this? Could we maybe swap that car out for this car so that you can afford this house? Real world. Okay, so 2,600. Let's do the same thing. Gross income. How much do we need our monthly gross to be? The monthly gross times 36% needs to be 2,600. Therefore, 2,600 divided by 36. Our monthly gross for this setup would need to be $7,223. That's how we could afford $1,200 PITI payment, a $700 car payment, a $200 student loan payment, and a $500 credit card statement every month payment. You with me? That's what they do. You can do this online, and this is the math that's happening in the algorithm behind the scenes when you plug the numbers into the little boxes. This is what's happening. Depends on the loan as to what these numbers are. But for your purposes, a conventional loan has a 28-36 qualifying ratio. Front end ratio is 28. That means the PITI needs to be not more than 28% of your monthly income. Back end ratio is 36%, meaning your PITI plus recurring other stuff can't exceed 36% of your gross income. So we saw, I think, let's see, what was it? I already erased it. 1,200 divided by the 28. We saw that the front end ratio, the amount of gross income, gross monthly we needed was 4,286. But in order to accomplish the back end ratio, we needed 72. What if your buyer says, okay, I qualify, I make $6,500 a month gross income, $6,500. How much are we off? If your buyer makes 65 and we need him to be at 7,223, we're off by $723. Oh, wait, look at that. If maybe mom and dad could help pay off some of these credit cards and get this thing down to 300, There's $200 that we could save toward this 723. And then if he could go back to the car that he gave back to his parents that's paid for, that's a 73 Buick, instead of the Benz, we can wipe this one out altogether and subtract that 7. And oh, look at that. He's in the black again. He's not in the red. Therefore, he can accomplish what he needs to in order to qualify for this house, right? Another way to say it is, does the borrower, if they make monthly gross income of $6,500, does the borrower qualify for this loan? The answer is no. They need to be able to hit both of these numbers. They definitely qualify under the front end ratio. They make at least $6,500 under the front end because they only needed 4286 to hit the front end ratio requirement. But they don't qualify under the back end. That's why we're monkeying around with these other monthly recurring debts, so that we can get this number down by getting this number down. So the qualifying ratio thing, they'll probably just test you on 2836. For your information, if it's an FHA loan, I think the ratio is like 43% for recurring instead of 36. So they let you have more of your monthly gross income being paid out toward all of your debt, recurring debt plus PITI. Let me see where I'm at here. Oh. Okay, let's take a look at this example. A buyer, look, there's a lot of stuff going on here. But all of this is just made up of the little tiny calculations we've already been doing. So this is all just it's like 7 problems rolled into one. And if we don't have time to get through all this, we'll do it the rest of it tomorrow. But buyers buying a property for $425. To buy it, they need a conventional loan with a ratio of 90-10, meaning they're borrowing 90% of $425. The interest rate is 4.5% for a 30-year term. The lender is charging a 1% origination fee and 3 discount points. The municipality where it's located is taxing property at 14 mills on a 75% of market value. So the tax value or the assessed value is 75% of the market value or the sale price. The commission is 5.5%. The attorney fees and miscellaneous expenses are $4,000. And so what would the calculations be? What do we need to know if they ask you for commit? They won't ask. This will not be one problem on the test. This is like possibly 7 different problems, but we've just kind of rolled them all into one here. Commission alone. What would be the commission, total commission in this problem? Well, it is true that they could give you way more than you need, and this is certainly the case here. But what do you need for commission? The rate for commission and the price, not the loan amount. Thank goodness we're getting paid commission on sale price, not loan amount. So you need $425 and you need 5.5%. You just do that math. There it is in the white box. $425 times 0.055. The total commission, $23,375. We good? What if they ask you about the tax value? Well, you've done that for a long time now. $425 times 75% of market value, $318,750 is the tax value. What if they ask about the annual taxes? Well, you're halfway there. $318,750 times the tax rate of 14 mills, but divided by 1,000 to get the right decimal, 0.014. Our annual taxes are $44,625.50. What's the loan amount? If we're buying it for $425 at a 90% LTV, 90% of $425 is $382.05. The annual interest. Okay, now we're getting into some new stuff. Annual interest, number 5, we take our loan amount of $382.05, multiply it by the interest rate, and that's it. Our annual interest is $17,212.50. total origination fee and discount points combined. That's common. They might very well ask you for that both, for the total of both. So you got to calculate origination fee and discount points and add them up together, and that's what the question is asking you. So in this case, total origination fee. What was origination fee? You tell me. I've been reading it to you this whole time. How much for origination? One. And then how much for discount points? 3. Yep, there we go. Okay, look at this. What's your inclination? You tell me. Somebody tell me how you would figure out the total combined of origination and discount points. What would be the steps? Sure. Well, careful though. Wait a minute. 1% of what? It's a loan fee. So what do we want to base it on? There it is. There you go. 425 sale price at 90% of that, which we've already done, and we got that, I believe, to be 382.5. So we need to calculate origination fee and discount points based off of 382.5. So that's our loan amount. All right. Well, sure, you could definitely calculate each of those individually. Or you could, since it's asking for both of them together and they're both percentages of the loan amount, you could say, well, origination fee is 1% of the loan amount and discount points is 3% of the loan amount. That's a total of 4% of the loan amount. You just saved yourself one round through the calculator. So 382.5 times 4%. The total of these things together, 15.3. Now, if they want to know either of those separately, now you got to go back and do those separately. But you could do either one. You could say that 1% is 3.825, and the 3% is that times 3. Or you could just figure out how much is the total percent. It's 4. 4% of it is same thing. Whichever way clicks in your brain the best. Doesn't matter. You don't have to know all the ways. Pick your best favorite way. Do it that way. And then loan balance after the first payment. Oh, no. Not that thing again. Well, okay. Got our loan factor. Oh, we didn't give a factor. I guess in the white box, we're giving you a factor of 5.07. Yeah. So 5.07 is our loan factor. In other words, if you borrow only $1,000, your monthly principal and interest is going to be $5.07. But you're borrowing $382,500. That times 5.07 gives you a PI payment of $1,939 and some change. Then we calculate our monthly interest, which I believe we know our annual interest of $17,212 from number 5 divided by 12 to get our monthly. Monthly interest is $1,434. Subtract that $1,434 from your monthly PI is going to give you the amount your loan amount is coming down. So your principal paid off after the first month's payment is $505. Therefore, your loan balance after the first payment is $382.5 minus $505. It's not on here, but you'd have to do that math. $382.5 minus $505. That's the gist of it, guys. I'm going to do some more of that math together, but let's talk about a couple more things before we go. How does this whole thing work real quick on the primary versus secondary market? Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve System. Anybody heard of the Federal Reserve? Well, it's not federal. That's actually a private entity with that as a name. It's like calling yourself Federal Real Estate Company. They might think you're a government real estate company, but that's just your name. It's the thing that keeps, hopefully, the economy in check, ideally. But the problem is it's run by people. and people are flawed. And so it also depends on what people put those people in power and what choices were made and blah, blah, blah. You know, I think it was last year, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, um, came up for reassignment, in other words, and Biden had to make a choice. President Biden had to choose whether to let Jerome Powell continue to be the Federal Reserve Chairman or to assign it to someone else. And there was big talk around that time. What's going to happen? What's he going to do? He ended up keeping him in place versus putting a new person in that position. So the politics of people in charge could make a difference in how the economy is run. The Federal Reserve System influences the economy. It has 12 banks across the country. And the Federal Reserve loans money. That's not like your Bank of America or your Wells Fargo. The Federal Reserve is comprised of 12 Federal Reserve banks. Your Bank of America or whoever it is you bank from borrows money from them at a certain rate, like a wholesale rate, and then turns around and loans the money to you at a retail rate. So they make money in that way. So the rate at which the Federal Reserve loans money to your bank, your local bank, affects the rate at which you borrow from them, right? Because the more they charge, the more they're going to charge you. So it does a couple of different things. Regulates the flow of money. We had a big financial upheaval this last year or two, and the Fed has been trying to fix it. And that's partly how this interest rate thing has been popping up. It controls the interest rate. It sets the interest rate. And does it set it at a certain point and high enough at a certain given time? Who knows? I guess history will tell, right? Hindsight will tell. It also sets reserve funds requirements for banks. What does that mean? Anybody remember Great Depression? How many of us were around in 1932? I don't think any of us. I probably have the best shot at being closest. The Great Depression came about partly because the economy tanked, and at the time, banks had learned this valuable lesson. Banks started taking money from people, keeping it in their little accounts for them, and the banks started noticing back then, before the Depression, they noticed, wow, people don't come and get their money. They just want to keep a place to park it. They don't ever take all of it out. They just need to pay their bills, but they keep a savings account. They keep balances in the bank, in our bank. So why are we just letting that money sit here unused? As long as we have enough to pay them the much smaller amount they tend to come and want at any one given time, let's just loan it out. Instead of keeping it in our vault, let's loan it out to people who want to pay us interest to make them loans. And they did. But of course, money plus profit can equal greed. And the banks are like, well, gosh, if we could make this much interest on this much money, we can make this much interest on this much money. Therefore, let's keep loaning out more and more and more and more. No regulation. They loaned out all the money they had. And so when the Depression hit and people had to get their money out of the banks, they all came at the same time to the bank. And the bank had to say, remember, what's that movie? What's the movie? I just totally blanked. My wife would be ashamed of me. The Jimmy Stewart movie, you know the one, the black and white Christmas movie. The first half is black and white. White Christmas, is that it? It's that idea. So they all came to the bank at once. We want our money. And the bank's like, we kind of loaned it out. We don't have it. It's not in the vault. We loaned it out. Well, we can't have that. That obviously is not the way to do it. So fast forward, part of the Federal Reserve duties is to say, hey, banks, you can't loan all your money out. You can loan some of it out, but you've got to keep certain minimums in place. Still unlikely that everybody's going to make a run on the bank, if you ever heard that term. But you've got to keep a certain bare minimum. So that's part of the Federal Reserve System, Federal Reserve's role as well, is to say you've got to keep this much. The whole point, the whole overarching point, of course, being to keep a favorable economic climate so that we don't have a catastrophe. When we come back tomorrow, we'll talk about the difference between the primary and secondary market. Put your names in the chat. and I'll see you then.